Recently, we looked at Queen's Park, a Scottish football club that reached 2 back-to-back FA Cup finals, making them the only Scottish team to do so. But did you know that they're not the only non-English club to reach the FA Cup final? In fact, there has only ever been one other non-English club to reach the FA Cup final, but this one does play in the English football pyramid. The club is Cardiff City, and they've reached the FA Cup final 3 times. Let's tell you about the one that's probably fresher in your memory, the 2007-08 final at Wembley, when then Championship Cardiff City faced Portsmouth of the Premier League, with Nigerian international Kanu scoring the winning goal to secure Portsmouth a second FA Cup crown. However, Cardiff have reached the final twice before that one, and one of those years something unique happened which has never been repeated and probably never will be repeated again. Let's go back in our footballing TARDIS to the 1924-25 season of the FA Cup. This was the 3rd FA Cup final to be hosted at Wembley Stadium, and Cardiff were the first Welsh club in an FA Cup final. There was a proposal earlier on in that decade to ban Welsh clubs from the FA Cup in the early 20s, with the idea being rejected, but the Welsh clubs' number was limited to 14 in total. This is despite Cardiff City joining the English Football League in 1920, and by this stage the Scottish teams and Irish teams that had played in the FA Cup in the early years were no longer invited to compete in the competition. The 1925 final saw Sheffield United take on Cardiff City. The Blades got to knock out their local rivals, the Wednesday Football Club, now known as Sheffield Wednesday, in the second round, and the Wednesday were the only team to score against the Blades on their route to the final. Cardiff, however, nearly didn't make it out the first round, having to have 3 matches to knock out Darlington. The final itself only saw 1 goal from the Blades' Fred Tunstall, meaning that Sheffield United secured their 4th FA Cup title. We must skip forward now to 1927 and the 1926-27 FA Cup final, which saw our boys in blue Cardiff City take on Arsenal in the final at Wembley. This is where that unique piece of history comes in, because Cardiff were already in a cup final that year. They'd qualified for the Welsh Cup final against Rhyl. However, the FA Cup final was first. The 2 clubs were the only Division 1 clubs left in the FA Cup by the quarter-final stages, so the 2 highest-ranked teams left in the quarter-finals made the final, which was played on April 23rd, 1927. There was only 1 goal once again scored in this tense game at Wembley, scored by Cardiff City's Hughie Ferguson on the 74th minute of the match, securing the one and only time the FA Cup has been won by a non-English club in what was dubbed the singing final because of the atmosphere at the game and the celebrations afterwards. Less than a fortnight later, Cardiff City made history that's probably never going to be repeated again by becoming the only club to win both the English FA and the Welsh FA Cup in the same season, beating Rhyl Athletic 2-0 in Wrexham, making history in the process. Cardiff City, as we know, wouldn't reach another FA Cup final until 2008, although they would go on to be, to this day, the second most successful team in Welsh Cup history, winning it 22 times, only topped by Wrexham, who have won it 23 times. Though Cardiff City did what Queen's Park from Glasgow couldn't do by winning 2 domestic FA Cups in one season, because if you remember back to our Queen's Park video, Queen's Park were Scottish Cup champions when they faced Blackburn Rovers the first time round in the FA Cup final, but they couldn't win it. But Cardiff are the only club to have won 2 domestic FA Cup titles, both Welsh and English, in one season. Something that will probably never be repeated again.